Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J. How you doing?
I am doing very well. One of the reasons that I'm doing so well this week is that there was a Modern Grand Prix, and it was won by, at least for sake of argument, an all-new archetype.
Yeah, I mean, Hardened Scales Affinity has been, extremely fringe on occasion, but a week ago, the week before this Grand Prix, it really burst on the scene, putting 3 copies in the top 8 of the mocks. And actually, Ari Lax did a excellent breakdown on Star City Games of the archetype after its big opening weekend in the mocks. And sure enough, I think a lot of people assumed. I mean, first of all, not everybody follows the mocks, of course, but it started spreading like wildfire because of the success it's been having on MitGo of people copying it on mock, because of the mocks. And I think that in Paper Magic, there was a question as to whether its success was really going to translate because, first of all, the MitGo metagame is not always the same as the Paper metagame, particularly for events like Modern. But second, it's a gimmick deck, right? Like in some ways. And so there's questions as to whether Modern is historically very able to adapt to whatever the deck of the week is. But sometimes that deck of the week is just a new fixture that's here to stay, such as Humans, the most popular deck in the field. What once seemed like a gimmick is now just like widely regarded as one of the pillars of the format.
Oh, I remember when Humans, like the concept of Humans was novel, right? Like it's all guys. And in fact, all the guys are humans. But with regard
to this Hardened Scales Affinity deck is, I think this big win by Lori Pispa is like this is a loud signal that this is not just a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
Right? Like after a week of people knowing about 3 copies in the top 8 of the mocks, outright winning the GP.
So I, of course, I'm a medium-ish MitGo player. I play, a fair amount. So I've played against this deck on MitGo, but to your point, I thought it was just like a gimmick deck. Like I thought oh, that's cute. And I tend to play decks that have a lot of shattering sprees, so I actually just didn't take it seriously to begin with. But then I was actually looking on MTG Goldfish last week to do some research, and I was like, wow, this is a top 20 popularity archetype? And then I looked at the Grand Prix results, and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm actually really happy to see it's pretty different, right? Even though it has a lot of the cards in common with other decks and other affinity decks, like the return of Arcbound.
Not even a lot. I don't think it even has that many in common. It has a few, but like Mox Opal, and from there you're looking at like, I guess, Steel Overseer. This is an affinity deck that is way more than 50% new cards. Even counting the land, it doesn't even have cranial plating.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
But the use of Arcbound Ravager, the Arcbound Worker now kind of feeding into the whole +1/+1 counter theme. Walking Ballista, Hangerback Walker, Steel Overseer, they all really like muscle sliver together of sorts because all this moving around of counters gets really magnified by obviously Hardened Scales in particular, which is just absurd in this deck. But they actually, as additional forms of Hardened Scales, instead of using any of those sort of double green, any of the other green creatures that you might normally put with something like this, they actually have 2 copies of Animation Module and 2 copies of Throne of Geth.
Yeah, shout out to Throne of Geth. It's not just for Chalice of the Void anymore.
Well, it's actually really sick in a deck like this because it gives you another 0-cost way to sacrifice artifacts. Sort of that Arcbound Ravager style of moving things around, which can allow you to make serious amounts of artifacts if you just sack your Steel Overseer. Or not Steel Overseer, sorry, Hangerback Walker. And what's more, you can just do it turn after turn after turn. So every turn, it's like a Steel Overseer, only it doesn't really die to removal the same way, and it has haste.
Yeah, so if we break that down a little bit, if you think about a card like an Arcbound Worker, right? Like an Arcbound Worker is basically a +1/+1 counter that is attached to a body, right? Like, but it's like a 0/0. It has a +1/+1 counter. When you sacrifice a card like Arcbound Worker, which has modular, you actually keep the full value of that Arcbound Worker and just attach it to a different.
It's like its +1/+1 counter moving actually resolves before the proliferate resolves, so you even get the benefit of the Throne of Geth activation from you sacrificing it. Like, you sacrifice the worker, put 1 +1/+1 counter on whatever, and by the time the Throne of Geth resolves, that thing that has a +1/+1 counter on it will get another +1/+1 counter. So, and many of these cards already have +1/+1 counters, but in particular, if you put it on Steel Overseer or one of the Nexuses.
Oh, sure. But then, obviously, if you've got, like, even like the first time I played against this deck on Miko, somebody played like just a first turn Hardened Scales. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? And he played a second turn Hardened Scales, right? I'm like, okay. And then second turn, he played a second land, and then he was just like Arcbound Worker. And I was just like, oh, wow. Like, this is not going to be what I thought. It's so, like, basically, if you're drawing multiple Hardened Scales, I mean, even one Hardened Scales, right, in this deck. Because
absolutely. Hardened Scales is ridiculous in this deck.
All the cards have +1/+1 counters, more or less, to start with. Like, the worst cards in this deck, like, it's fair to say Arcbound Worker is just the weakest card in the deck. Not that it's a bad card, but it's just, like, on its power level, it's obviously weaker than Arcbound Ravager, right? So Arcbound Worker is like Wild in the Cattle, and it just goes up from there.
Even better, I think, because if you have a Hardened Scales, the Worker comes down as a 2/2, and then when it moves its 2 counters, it'll actually move 3 counters.
Yep.
So a single Hardened Scales is giving you 5/5 worth of stats.
If you got another body slash.
Because of the Arcbound Worker, right, if you have another body when it dies. So this deck it was really impressive to watch, And it even gets to make use of more of the broken cards, like Ancient Stirrings, help pull the whole thing together. What do you think of the use of a split, 2 Throne of Geth, 2 animation module? The animation module is obviously not the exact same. I mean, you can add counters to stuff slowly, but the real joy here is that you can just make as many 1/1s as you want all over the place, right?
So I like the animation module because it makes you not so all in, which is not, it was just probably an overstatement because the deck isn't that all in. It has cards like Hangerback Walker, which can help it not just have like a single big threat, it kind of go wide or whatever. But the thing about it is animation module isn't free, right? Like, you do have to have some upkeep mana to keep it going.
But
I think you can be tight in this deck. Like, you have to use your mana to activate your Nexuses, or you might be dumping your Horizon Canopy, and it only has 20 lands total. I mean, I guess there's 4 Mox Opal.
Well, it does form kind of a sweet combo with Arcbound Ravager, though, right?
Oh, sure.
Because you're like, sack the servo, put a counter on the Ravager. Because you put a counter on the Ravager, pay a mana, get a servo, sack the servo. So you can just pay mana to get servos or counters. You can just keep getting more and more and more material using your mana efficiently.
Oh, yeah. It's very reminiscent, I think, if you're just like limited by this kind of free sacrifice outlet, 1/1 creature, and just being limited by how much mana you have. It's similar to the Sword of the Meek combo from, back in the day in Extended.
Yep.
But rather than just making the guys, you're just making the guys for the purpose of making more size and then kind of making like one other guy. Like it's instead of like just super going wide, you're just like using that potential go wide ability to just increase the size of one threat.
Well, you can stack on multiple threats if you want. You can sure. add to all your other threats if you want. You can spread it out pretty efficiently.
But then I think that the thing that's cool about it is you'll end up with another body at the end of the loop, probably. So
yeah.
So there's like some flex in this archetype. Laurie Pispa, the Grand Prix champion, played an evolutionary leap. What do you think about that leap?
It's a little surprising to me. I mean, it'd be cool if it's right. It is a little surprising to me. I'd have to see in action. Just like animation module uses up a lot of your mana, so I don't know totally how much mana you're going to have laying around, but it would be sweet if it's right. I'm a little surprised though.
It's kind of mana intensive and in fact green intensive, I think, for this deck. Obviously, the deck has 6 forests and some horizon canopies and a Pendelhaven and
which, by the way, I love 6 forests.
Yeah,
the discipline of 6 forests instead of, like there's a lot of lands that you might be tempted to play, but by having so many forests, Laurie was able to capitalize on the massive increase in popularity of Settle the Wreckage. Like, you know how many affinity decks are out there with just like one island or whatever, right?
Or nothing, right?
Or nothing. But when you get Settle the Wreckage in a deck like this, and then you go find 6 forests or whatever, and then you can actually, now you just have a ton of mana for fueling this stuff like Animation Module or any of these activated abilities like the Walking Ballista or Hangerback Walker.
Yeah, I actually like that a lot. I mean, and then to a lesser degree, it gives you plenty of fuel to be exchanging with Path to Exile. So if you've got just a bunch of lands in play, right? You just get like 4 free lands from a Settle or something like that. And it's super plausible. There's so many potential token creatures in this deck. Just the ability to just hard cast a Hangerback Walker or Walking Ballista that's like a pretty decent sized card, all other things held equal. Like even without the hardened scales going on, which is obviously here. I mean, I like that. I think that's very attractive.
What do you think of just one Blinkmoth Nexus in order to help make room for a Phyrexia's Core and a Ruins of Oran Reef?
I can't. I don't like it. I think part of it is like Ruins of Oran Reef is obviously a powerful card, but the fact that it comes into play tapped, I like one Ruins of Oran Reef. To me, the bigger question is the Phyrexia's Core. Now, maybe you I'd be way more on board with Phyrexia's Core if it didn't also cost a mana to use. Like, obviously, you're not. If Phyrexia's Core, tap, pay a colorless, and sacrifice an artifact, you gain a life. It's not about getting the life. It's definitely a way to have another sack outlet so that you can, be able to move these counters around and do things like break open a Hangerback Walker or whatever. To me, that extra utility is just not quite worth as much as an extra Blinkmoth Nexus. But I actually like the one Ruins of Oran Reef, even though it comes into play tapped. I think that being able to tap the Ruins of Oran Reef to get a counter on something, the turn that you play it, or that it enters the battlefield, being able to do that without needing to invest another mana beyond it, I think that's a very efficient conversion rate. The only real vig you're paying is the 1 mana up front. I think that it's a nice option as a 1-of. I would never want to draw 2. But I don't hate drawing 1 in this deck at all. I actually have some one point which kind of agrees with Laurie, and then maybe some contrasting thoughts. First of all, it kind of makes sense to play fewer Blinkmoth/Inkmoth Nexuses in this strategy because he doesn't have cranial plating.
Well, I would definitely play the Inkmoth, but we can come to that in a minute. Yeah, yes, less to Blinkmoth. I think the Inkmoth doing double damage because of Infect is it's just too good of a combo with Ravager anyway.
So I'm actually a little torn on that. Oftentimes we see bias towards Blinkmoth Nexus over Inkmoth Nexus and cranial plating kind of traditional affinity decks. So you think definitely Inkmoth Nexus is
no question
should be biased towards. I actually agree with you, but yeah, I'm just saying I've seen it in the past where there's 4 Blinkmoth and then fewer Inkmoth.
Yeah, I just think that in this deck it gets so much mileage out of Arcbound Ravager I think that combo is just like the situations where you're even on the Nexus plan are actually lower in this deck than in a traditional affinity deck. And I think that in the spots where you are on the actual Nexus plan, you got to remember you've got stuff like Ancient Stirrings help find Ravager more often because Ravager is just like the best card. And I think that when you actually do it, when you actually go for it, it's just so much better to have that, like the extra value of chipping in with some of your other threats is worth so much less than it being more likely that you can one-turn kill somebody this other way. This is not a deck that's all about nickel and diming people. Blinkmoth Nexus is about nickel and diming. Inkmoth Nexus is about the one-turn kill. And this deck, remember, this is the kind of deck that your beatdown is going to often be like 0, 0, 1, 2, 45. Right? So this deck is not actually doing as much incremental damaging as you might think. It will sometimes, but I think that the vast majority, like there's just so much more equity to be had from maximizing the bursty kills.
So I actually, if you're on the Ruins of Orin Reef plan, I think you said you would never want to draw 2, so Lori played only 1 in the main deck. I can imagine wanting to sideboard more copies because it's a good grindy card. It takes like any threat and then makes that threat so much more significant, especially in a deck that has 4 hardened scales, right? So I can kind of imagine, is there a matchup where I just want to have more land, If there were, I'd consider that. I think that Lori is leaning on the leap for that, though.
Yeah. Plus the sideboard Karns are also another way to grind.
I don't like Karn. It's so expensive. 4 mana?
Are you kidding? Dude, you put it down and it makes like a Master of Ethereum on the way in. And then it like makes another Master of Ethereum the next turn.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
I don't know. I think this deck only has 20 lands, and I think it's just going to be playing under pressure so often. But I think isn't that like partially a response to Path to Exile? That's a great point. Yeah, I guess decks with Path and Settle the Wreckage are just like, I guess the best thing ever is to like get in, force them to tap a bunch of mana if they're control or whatever, and then resolve Karn. The Karn might just win the game for you right there. Because it's not like standard where people like, a control deck can attack the Karn, right? like the Karn's there.
They're not going to like flash down a Torrential Gearhulk or something.
No, if it's there, I mean, they got to figure out some way to get the Karn and be like, I better draw my Gideon, or, chip away at it 2 points at a time, maybe 3. It's very solid in the case that somebody's giving you free lands. That's a great point, Patrick.
I also just think that it's a little dicey playing. I think after sideboarding, it's more important for your land to not come into play tapped in a deck like this, because there are a lot of cards out there that are just so devastating for you relatively early. You cannot miss a beat early on. Like, for instance, frequently you're going to want more mana against somebody who has Stony Silence.
So yeah, that's actually
coming out tapped is like not where you want to be against those people.
Is Stony's? I mean, I know this is going to sound a little silly. Is Stony Silence even great against this deck?
Yes.
Like, I've played Stony Silence against
extremely Affinity, great,
and I feel like regular Affinity, and I feel like it did good work. Right, it didn't win the game. I still had to deal with their guys, but it slowed them down a lot. Like here, there's no cranial plating to shut off.
Are you kidding? There's so many things to shut off. Setting aside the obvious usual Arcbound Ravager and Mox Opal.
Yep.
And Darksteel Citadel. Dude, so first of all, a Hangerback Walker, it's so different when you can't just keep doing this every turn. Steel Overseer is a huge one. Walking Ballista not being able to shoot. Welding Jar doing nothing?
Oh, Welding Jar doing nothing.
Throne of Geth? There's like so much stuff here, man. Yeah, I think Stony Silence is incredible in this matchup. That's why he's got 4 Natures claims. It's almost exclusively for Stony Silence.
I thought it might be like for bridge. This.
I mean, it's for a lot of things.
Needs to attack, right? It can't win outside of the attack phase, can it?
Yeah, Walking Ballista.
Oh, of course.
And it's very realistic to do that because this is a deck that can get a 20 power ballista if it needs to.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously with Hardened Scales, but also, like, it doesn't need a 20 power ballista. It might need a 5 power ballista, right? Like,
right.
He's going to get in a couple of times before Ensnaring Bridge can lock him out.
Right. What do you think of 4 Dampening Sphere?
I mean, obviously, this is a large number of Dampening Spear relative to what we've seen. A
lot of people have been using 1 or 2.
Yeah, so I mean, 4 that's a commitment. I don't know. Is it? I mean, do you want to draw 1 or do you want to draw multiple? Is 1 enough? Is the question I have. Like, all right, I drew 1 Dampening Spear. Is that enough to slow down?
Oh yeah,
my opponent?
If they don't destroy it. So it's got really a couple big matchups, right? So first and foremost, of course, this is an anti-Tron measure, right?
Oh yeah, that's the big deck that produces more than 1 mana.
And then Tron is actually a pretty sizable chunk of the metagame. Like, I think it's, if you combine the different Tron archetypes, I think it's double-digit percentage.
I mean,
which is something.
Mono Green Tron is like the second most popular archetype in Modern, approximately.
And then its ability to interact with some of the combo decks, like, I mean, the various ad nauseum Storm combo type of decks have not been that prevalent. But I think the big thing with Dampening Sphere is just how much it messes up Snapcaster Mage. It's deceptively good at interacting with decks that need to use lots of cantrips. Like, if you play against a Death Shadow deck, or whatever, it's a little bit of an Arcane Sanctuary, like an Arcane Lab, where you can only play 1 spell because, like, the amount that it slows down all that stuff, Serum Visions, any of that kind of stuff, it's interesting.
Yeah, it certainly cuts down your ability to do all of your damage in the same turn. So, for example, you know how sometimes you have these games against what seems like a control deck? I mean, just on paper they're a control deck, but they just like whiz bang you with an opt or something, or actually a Thought Scour probably is a better example on the first turn. They've got like a Street Wraith or something, and all of a sudden you're staring down like a super fast Taziger with like 1 blue open for a 1 mana counterspell. Like, it's very hard to set that up if the opponent plays a Damping Spear on the first turn.
Well, second, you're just not going to play the Dampening Sphere on turn 1 that often. I mean, maybe if you get a Mox Opal going, but...
Well, I was assuming a Mox Opal, but sure, second.
Yeah, overall, I think this deck is really sweet, and I think it's vulnerable to a lot of the same hate cards as Affinity, but it's not it doesn't play out the same at all. Like, it's also, this is going to sound kind of funny, but Ancient Grudge is still really, really good against this deck, but it is not anywhere close to as good as it is against regular Affinity. Like against regular Affinity, Ancient Grudge is just like the best thing ever.
Yeah, because you can surgically get them, because they've got like, probably 1 Cranial Plating in play, or like 1 Ravager, or at least they're committed all of their stuff to 1 thing for this turn. So you can just steal a huge amount of tempo, and you have extra card advantage lined up for next turn.
Yeah, like, this deck doesn't have nearly as much investment in any one specific thing, and it just has a lot of death triggers. Like, there's a lot of its artifacts that make stuff when they go away.
Yeah, so the reason I asked about Stony Silence is I've been playing a split in Modern with like 2 Stony Silence and 1 Shattering Spree, with the Stony Silence largely being a concession to KCI. Like, it's obviously all these cards are good to some degree, right? But like, KCI has a really, really tough time.
I think Stony Silence is better against this deck than Shatter Spree.
See, I was thinking that Shattering Spree might be better, because like, if you just go Hardened Scales guys, like, Stony Silence doesn't save you from Hardened Scales guys, and Shattering Spree does.
It could, because when you do Stony Silence against their guys, sometimes their guys are attacking for 3 a turn. And you have all the time in the world. Like, it depends on what the rest of your deck is. But if you're a burn deck, you got a lot of time. Whereas if you have Shattering Spree is not inherently the best way to fight Hangerback Walker.
No.
You know what I mean? Like,
But this deck is just better against, what my traditional sideboarding strategy is anyway, because so many of the creatures are coming in bigger than 2/2. Searing Blood isn't.
Unless you have a Stony Silence in play. Well,
I'm just saying, like, I always side in Searing Blood, and it's not as good against this deck.
Yeah, I think Searing Blaze is really good against this deck.
Oh yeah, but you start that, right? But against regular Affinity, I'm saying you sat in Searing Blood. All their guys are X1.
I don't, right? And this deck is so good at sacrificing its guy.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I think you're right.
It's a very, very different. It's surprisingly different considering the complexion of the deck is superficially pretty similar. But it's super cool, and I'm happy to see a legitimately different, innovative deck taking down such a big tournament.
Mm-hmm. Actually, so you mentioned Ironworks, and Ironworks put up a top 4 finish. But not really a lot of innovation beyond Psy Master Thopterist in the sideboard. I thought it was a little cute.
Yeah,
and people have used that a little, but it's not nothing. We've been seeing some Psy Master Thopterist decks that are actually more dedicated, but to have this be part of a sideboard transformation plan, it's a little interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of so in Claude Schmidt's deck, the Ironworks combo deck, he's got a lot of cool cards in the sideboard. I don't think any of them are totally new. Like, i.e., we've seen some version of these cards in similar decks a lot of times. But it's cool to see them in conjunction with each other. For example, like Gyruper Aether Grid. That's like people play that in artifact heavy decks. But it's cool to see that like alongside Guttural Response and there's like a Galvanic Blast, right? Like, these are all like good cards that we've seen elsewhere, and you can just kind of nudge them in. When would you want to play your Defense Grid versus your Guttural Responses?
I mean, I think it's more having a mixture. Like, if you don't like the first Defense Grid has extra mileage because of these 3 Inventor's Fairs.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I think you really want to draw a Guttural Response.
I see. So I guess the plan then is to just accumulate land and then slow play the Defense Grid?
Yeah, like, it's also just like one of those, Guttural Response is slightly better, but the first Defense Grid is better because you've got 3 Inventor's Fairs to go along with the 4 Ancient Stirrings to go find it a disproportionate amount of the time. Just so that one of your sideboard cards you just get extra mileage out of from all these tutors.
Yeah, that makes good sense. What do you think about 3 Lightning Bolts and 1 Galvanic Blast?
I like the cut of his jib.
Yeah. Like, if you were dancing in the street, you would definitely throw a quarter into his hat. Like,
I don't know how you arrive at the 3 bolt 1 Galvanic Blast split, but I'm into it. Whatever.
I mean, I have a hard time imagining a situation when you would want a bolt that a Galvanic Blast wouldn't be better in this deck.
When you want to hit something with 3 toughness.
Yeah, but what about isn't 4 good enough for 3 toughness?
Yeah, I mean, when you got it,
Are there a lot of things that are just specifically 3? Like Camball is 3.
Camball?
Yeah, that's 3.
What's Camball?
Camball, the black-white guy.
Yeah, is that a big part of the...
I'm just thinking of things that are 3, right? Like, what do you need to do exactly 3, right? Like,
hit the turn 3 spell queller before you got set up.
Okay, I can see that.
Which is, I think, the main thing you're killing, right? I mean...
But it's not... it's not that hard to get your artifacts online.
Yeah, but it's not that hard to care. Like, it's not like there's anything with 4 toughness, so why go to the trouble?
That's a good point. Then why have the 1 Galvanic Blast, right?
Just switch it on them.
I guess if they're maging Lightning Bolt, But I don't think they're very often.
It reminds me of like sideboarding 3 Thoughtseize and 1 Duress. You know, where like maybe it's just a numbers crunch where you actually need 1 sideboard card against a certain matchup that has 4. I don't know. I'm just trying to conjecture. It might just be style. Who knows?
Actually, but you make a good point, right? Like, let's say you had, just for sake of argument, in your black-blue control deck, you wanted 4 cheap discard spells for control, but you had like 1 slot open that you want to bring in against burn, and it's way better to bring in a Duress than a Thoughtseize against burn, right? If you only
right, and it might be similar where you're like, well, I prefer the Thoughtseize against the control deck because they do have Snapcaster and Torrential Gearhulk or whatever, but like the first Duress I draw is probably as good as the Thoughtseize most of the time.
Yeah, I buy it. I'm in.
So, Infect, I thought this sideboard card, this sideboard plan was kind of, a little bit flying under the radar, even when it was working this past weekend. Kenneth had an Infect deck with 4 Geist of St. Traft in the sideboard for the full-on transformation.
I mean,
only a single Temple Garden, so as to not tip his hand.
Yeah, so
of course there's Noble Hierarch too, but
But typically this deck doesn't have a lot of use for white mana. Their Noble Hierarchs can always make white, but they're not tapping for white typically. So Geist of St. Traft, what are you getting here? So you're getting essentially 6 power before it starts getting boosted, but it's hexproof, right? That's
the big thing, because everybody's boarding it. Like, they've got a ton of really cheap removal because they're going after your Glistener Elf, your Blighted Agent, your Inkmoth Nexus, and it's actually been a relatively successful plan historically. A lot of people are just lighting you up with like they might have like Culligan's Command, Lightning Bolt, Electrolyze. And if you just drop a Geist of St. Traft on them, woo!
So I'm thinking here. So let's just go through some of the buffing cards. So Kenneth's playing 2 Rancors, right?
Yep.
Talk to me about Rancor. I've always been suspicious that there weren't enough Rancors being played in this archetype. Like usually 0, right? So now we see 2.
Well, sometimes people play 4. I just think that I like 2 Rancor. I don't think you want to go too heavy. I'd be more inclined to play less Rancor rather than more. I think that Rancor opens you up even more to that cheap, fast removal. The reason I actually kind of like some amount of Rancor at all right now is because of the popularity of humans. And you don't want your guy to get chump blocked. And you had a few different ways to get around that. But it's really the trample that is the attractive card here, the attractive part of Rancor.
So I was actually going to riff on exactly what you're talking about and use that as an argument against good old Rancor. I think that if I were to go with Kenneth's build of Infect specifically, I would just be all in on Distortion Strike over Rancor. Right? If you're going to go Geist of St. Traft, Distortion Strike is so much better than Rancor, it's hard to describe. Right? Like,
that's true. Like, I do agree. Looking at this, it is surprising that there's only 1 Distortion Strike.
Like, anybody's Goblin Guide will trade with your Geist of St. Traft if it's got a Rancor on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that you're boarding in Geist of St. Traft against Goblin Guide guy, but maybe.
I'm just saying, I don't know. Timely Reinforcements tokens are going to be able to take down.
Snapcaster Mage.
Sure. Whatever horrible body. I was trying to pick a terrible creature for combat purposes, right? Obviously, Geist of St. Traft is super weak if it's actually getting in a fight. It's awesome only when you've got some sort of can't be blocked attached to it, because that matches up so well with its hexproof. And then if you're like, Geist of St. Traft, I'm going to slap a Distortion Strike onto this guy, all of a sudden it's 7 damage before additional buffs. And now it's just live, right? It's not going to get blocked. You can just hurl whatever you want at it. It's got hexproof. You probably got like a 2-turn clock if you've got enough, Might of Old Crosses or something. But Rancor, it's way less exciting. It doesn't buff its defense. Might get in a fight.
Yeah, I could see going without Rancor. I think Rancor I don't mind Rancor in small numbers, but I think you're right. Distortion Strike does seem like it might be accomplishing a lot of that
for this build, specifically for this build.
Yeah.
Right? Like I love it when Infect is good. I don't know, like it just
that is weird
that I like that. Yeah, it's weird. It's like a creature deck, but it's it's also a combo deck, and it's fast, but its guys are terrible. Like, I don't know. It's not like any other decks. That's what I like about it. It's kind of like the better, worse version of green white hexproof. I just like it, but I hate green white hexproof. Boggles. How do you feel about Boggles? What do you think about it? Not like, oh, it's good sometimes, right?
I'm pretty neutral.
Yeah.
Like all these decks in Modern.
If there's no Grixis to it, you don't like any of them.
No, I mean I think that people who play with Tarmogoyf, Snapcaster Mage, or Tassiger, there's something, you're playing some kind of game that's vaguely resembling Magic. But there's a lot of decks that are a little bit less that. Actually, though, a deck that does play real Magic and also happens to have Geist of St. Traft, Spirits was big on the move again this weekend. Both blue-white Spirits and Bant Spirits.
Very, very popular. Both of distinctly popular archetypes are both top 20 archetypes in Modern now. So, are you talking maybe Joachim Haram's Bant Spirits deck from top 8?
Well, we can look at that one. I was even thinking Strosky's.
Okay,
they're very yeah, they're similar, but I think that so Strosky. So they're both collected company Bant decks. And they're making use of Spirit Tribal, which already had Drogskull Captain and picked up Masolium Wanderer, a couple years ago, as well as Rattle Chains in small numbers if you want. But the big new part of this deck that gives it the oomph is the Supreme Phantom, which is 1 in a blue, 1/3 flying. Other spirits you control get +1/+1. This is that one additional Lord needed to buff all these Geist of St. Traft, Spell Queller, Selfless Spirit, Rattle Chains, Phantasmal Image, the Wanderer, all that stuff.
What a perfect card, right? So it's 1/3 for 1 in a blue. So on body, you're like, there's been some precedent on this, but it has flying and it's a Lord. Like, you just play this and then you follow up with Geist of St. Traft. I mean, the Geist of St. Traft is now so much bigger.
Yeah. I mean, it's also kind of nice to give Geist of St. Traft a little hasty action, so to speak, where you've got the Geist in play, but it's held off by a blocker. But if you just play Supreme Phantom, and so your Geist is immediately bigger and can live.
The Supreme Phantom is actually so awesome because if you play it on turn 2 and then you follow up with the Spell Queller, it has 4 toughness, which pulls it out of lightning bolt range. It's just a small thing, but there's so many decks, like Jeskai, for example, that deal with lightning bolt and lightning helix. Spell Queller being that much stronger.
Yeah, the Phantasmal Images are also kind of interesting for being able to copy the Supreme Phantom, which pushes them both out of bolt range, in addition to the obvious combo of copying Drogskull Captain. They're not bolt range, sorry, because obviously the Phantasmal Image can still just be bolted, but
But the combo
but in terms of making him a little bigger.
Of Drogskull Captain and Phantasmal Image makes a much more durable Phantasmal Image, though, right?
Oh, for sure. Like, you can't really target when it has hexproof. Unless you got Wafo and all, if you're just going to show up and
shine
make everything, put a spotlight on him. What do you like better out of the Bant versus blue-white?
I mean, it's hard to cheer against Noble Hierarch. That's where I'd start. But beyond the Noble Hierarch, I think that the blue-white deck is... I mean, I don't know. Is this deck... It's silly to say this out loud. Is this deck really getting that much out of Collected Company?
So that's a great point. Just a second, because I think you've hit the nail on the head. There is one other 2-cost spirit from the core set 2019. Strosky did not feature them. Haram had 2 copies of Remorseful Cleric, 1 in a white, 2/1 flying. Sacrifice it to exile all cards from target player's graveyard, which I thought was a great call for this weekend. At the very least, over in Prague, because the amount of black-red graveyard decks. Whether it's black-red with Vengevines or black-red with like the Phoenix and the all your cycling cards, like
the Hollow One deck.
Yeah, Hollow One, and it's not like you don't get a little bit of extra mileage out of Remorseful Cleric's ability to interact with Tarmogoyf for Knight of the Reliquary or Snapcaster Mage or whatever. Like it's just a very flexible, useful card, and it's a 2/1 flyer. It is tough for me to want to only play 3 Supreme Phantoms, but I think I would want to play 4 Supreme Phantoms personally. But the reason I thought it was interesting, the point about Collected Company, actually in the over in the U.S., the Open in Baltimore featured blue-white spirits with we'll get to blue-white spirits in a minute, but actually a different take on Bant in the top 16. Todd Stevens gave up Collected Company in his Bant deck. He's still playing a Spellqueller deck, and instead of like focusing on the Spirits engine, he used like more of the like traditional Celestia-esque cards, like Voice of Resurgence and so on, Knight of the Reliquary. But he traded in his 4 Collected Companies for 2 Jace the Mind Sculptors and 2 Teferi, Hero of Dominarias. And then what's more, his creature package is a little bit less flying evasion and a little bit more card advantage with 3 Courser of Kruphix, a Nissa Vastwood Seer, a Tireless Tracker. That's an Eternal Witness to go along with those 3 Knight of the Reliquaries.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that he's really, he's trading in his Collected Companies, it looks like, for Jason Teferi, but he's really buying Dramica's Command, Path to Exile, and Settle the Wreckage, right? So, because he's reducing the intensity of the creatures in his deck in order to get all these spells. And then
that's true.
He's making up the card advantage with Jason and Teferi. But I think
Courser.
Yeah, but what he's really buying is Settle the Wreckage and Path to Exile. Because the creatures in Todd's deck are actually outstanding Collected Company type creatures, right? Like, you really just want to, dump an Eternal Witness and a Knight of the Reliquary on someone in the middle of combat. That's awesome, But, getting these spells back is differently awesome.
Dude, I love Jace with Courser of Kruphix. Let me brainstorm, put back a land, play it off the top, gain a life. Your turn.
How about Jason Nissa?
Oh, yeah. Also good. So what about Jason, Knight of the Reliquary, man? Get your shuffle on? Yeah.
I mean, how about Jason? How about Jason for land? That's fine.
The reason I wanted to kind of dive into blue-white spirits a little bit, such as the winner of SCG Baltimore, Steven Borikov, his blue-white spirits deck is very similar to these other decks, except for just cutting Noble Hierarch and Collected Company. And instead of Noble Hierarch, he just has one extra land, one extra vial, and then he's got a couple of Thalia Guard. He's got some Thalia Garden of Thraben action. And then instead of Collected Company, he's just got 4 Rattle Chains and just goes a little bit heavier on the same stuff that the other people are playing, and 1 Kira Great Glass Spinner. But the thing I keep coming to when I look at this list here, God, he's come so far. Why not finish it? Why not play Lingering Souls? Like, I think it's a lot harder if you're playing Noble Hierarch, right? But if you're playing like just blue-white, it would be so easy. He's already got 4 Flooded Strand to play one one Godless Shrine and 1 Watery Grave would cost so little. Like, cut your Horizon Canopy and like one of the other lands, like a Cavern of Souls.
1 Godless Shrine. Right? You don't even have to play the second one.
I see. I don't know. I think you might even want to have 7. Like, you could get another fetch land. I don't know how much value you get out of these utility lands. I just think that if you just played a little bit of black mana, just a tiny little bit, I think Lingering Souls is just so phenomenal when you have 4 Drog Scale Captains and 4 Supreme Phantoms pumping them all.
Right, Aether Vial? I mean,
it's not good with Aether Vial.
No.
That's true.
It's
and it's not good with
Aether Vial. You play Aether Vial, right? And then you just tap your mana to cast, like for example, you can play the front side of Lingering Souls, and then like the following turn you have like the backside of Lingering Souls and like a mana open for Path to Exile, and then when your opponent goes to make a move, you just drop Drogskull Captain at instant speed to like buff your tokens in combat. Like, I actually think it's awesome with Aether Vial, even though it's a little non-intuitive. No,
that makes sense. I also think you're getting a lot of value from remember the Wanderer. Whenever a spirit enters the battlefield under your control, gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it doesn't have to be cast. So you can actually get +4/+4 from your Lingering Souls.
Just a slam?
Yeah, in case you got to, like, get them. Get them good. Dude, what do you think of all these worships all over the place?
I don't like it one bit. I think everyone should just delete them. Don't even think about it.
Dude, it is not a good time to play Burn.
It is not a good time to play against worship. I mean, the worst feeling in the world is you have to figure out how to, your plan was just like, all right, how many more burn spells do I need to draw to, race this reality smasher? And then it becomes, oh shoot, now I need to kill the reality smasher. Oh my God. And when they got hexproofs, you can't kill him anyway. I don't like it one bit. Everyone should just delete worship. Don't play it. Unless you think you're going to play against burn. It's very good against burn if you have hexproof, guys.
I think it's really good against a couple other decks, too. Like, for instance, it's pretty sick against the colorless Eldrazi, right?
I mean, it's very sick in that matchup. Like, imagine you're playing the mono-green affinity deck. Are you going to side in Nature's Claim against blue-white spirits? Is that, like, on your agenda?
I mean, I'm not saying you want to.
Because, I mean, you're just dead on board if they play worship. Your deck has no removal, right? So, you're like, I'm just not going to get this Selfless Spirit in combat. Attack you for 2.
Yep. Yeah, no, it puts them between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I mean, this is I was gonna say I actually think that it's a great time to play burn, but I always think that.
Yeah, I really don't think it is.
Yeah, well,
worship is like really popular right now.
It is played in many different decks. Yeah. And they only have to draw 1 because you can't remove it, right? The second copy doesn't do anything.
Well, I mean, sort of, right? Like, what if it does something, right? Like, what if you board in, some sort of a disenchant effect so that you have some prayer of possibly winning?
In the words of your good friend and mine, Patrick Sullivan, I'd rather lose than play Wear Tear.
That's dedication. I'm not saying that it's a bad time for Patrick Sullivan to play Burn.
Just for everybody else, yeah.
Dude, there's a lot of Baneslayer Angels and Lyra Dawnbringers too.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of that stuff. That's just guys. You just chain to the rocks a guy. Worship, hexproof. No mas. Tap tap.
So there was a little bit different of a take on, all those various Dredgevine decks and so on. Did you happen to see the top 16 build that Ricardo used over in the GP? That was like a Vengevine, Vizara Seer, Insolent Neonate, Gravecrawler, Bridge from Below, Faithless Loot, and Grizzly Salvage-ish deck from one angle.
Yeah.
But then there's this Stitcher's Supplier, and from there we start ramping into the weird part. 4 Walking Ballista, 3 Hangerback Walker, and 4 Goblin Bushwhacker.
Oh, yeah. This deck is live, right? So you could have Stitcher's Supplier. You can have Faithless Looting. Your job is just to dump Bridge from Below on turn 1 if you can, right? And then you just, throw your hand away with, 0 casting cost Hangerback Walkers or 0 casting cost Walking Ballistas. And then you just get some, if you dump, 2 bridges, which is, winning the lottery, and then you just play, some 0 casting cost artifact creatures, you just have, 8 power or something.
Well, and Vengevine, too.
Oh, yeah, you could easily just cast Vengevine for free.
Right, because you can go turn 1 Stitcher Supplier yourself, flip a Vengevine and a Bridge from Below, then 0 a Ballista or a Hangerback Walker, and you're cooking. You are cooking with gas.
So the beauty of this strategy is that it is a graveyard deck because it's got Bridge from Below, and then obviously it's got Gravecrawler and Vengevine, but it doesn't need to use its graveyard in a persistent manner. It just gets a graveyard advantage for 1 turn, and that's enough. And it doesn't it's just not sticking around so that if somebody draws a Tormod's Crypt off the top of their deck, it might be too late.
Mm-hmm. Another top 16 deck. Jeremy Dezani, on the heels of his big win with Esper in Standard, back with a win in Modern with Esper. It might look like he's playing blue-white control on the surface with 3 Jace the Mind Sculptor and 2 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, but he's got a basic swamp. What do you make of a basic swamp? And it's particularly curious because not only does he have no black cards in the main deck, his fetch lands are 4 Flooded Strands, which can't find the basic swamp either. All he's got to find that basic swamp are 4 Field of Ruins.
No, Patrick.
What could possibly? Of course, Path to Exile.
Yep, opponent Path to Exile is.
Yep, on the Snapcaster Mage
is the main way to get it, I think.
Right. So between the Path to Exile, the Field of Ruin, and part of the reason I mentioned Field of Ruin though is because sometimes you're not going to want Path to Exiles in the matchups where the swamp is relevant. And that's because his plan, his only black cards are 2 copies in the sideboard, 2 copies of Chromium the Mutable. Chromium to go over the top.
Unbeatable Elder Dragon.
What do you think of Chromium as a sideboard plan in a blue-white control deck?
I think that in the matchups that it's in, it's probably close to unbeatable. It has flash and conditional hexproof, and you get it they set you up with their Path to Exile, and they think they're so clever.
I don't think they're going to Path to Exile you. Your only creatures are 2 Snapcaster Mages and 2 Vendilion Clicks.
I think a lot of the time, it depends on the matchup that you're in, right? But they get too much stuff. They're going to leave in something, and they know that you've got Celestial Colonnade.
That's true.
Right? They're going to have, you never don't have Celestial Colonnade. So they're just going to leave it in because it's better than, I don't know, Supreme Verdict. Except here, Supreme Verdict would have been way better.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if this tech is still the tech next week once the cat's out of the bag. But this is a really cool plan, right?
I love the blue-white control deck in Modern just on the basis that if they get their stuff, they look so good. You know? They just look fantastic. But it is a little clunky, you know?
Yeah, I do. But you got to remember this style. I think this style of blue-white is a meaningful upgrade over the previous blue-white. So this is almost exactly Mark Herberhol's PTQ winning list that he was espousing. The tech, like for instance, Herberhol's was a big proponent of Oust. You know, and the sort of more disciplined approach combined, like the more disciplined approach, like less of the fancy stuff, but then playing 4 copies of Terminus and then making use of cards like, obviously Serum Visions can potentially help set that up. But the use of Opt on your opponent's turn as an additional way to trigger it. And the big one is, of course, just Jace the Mind Sculptor putting the Terminus back. And this is an archetype that I think this deck is I think this strategy is very much the real deal. Since Herberholz's win, it has it's been like wildfire. It's been, it put up great success in both the Classic and the Open, great success in the Grand Prix, and I think its stock is on the rise. This Terminus Jace the Mind Sculptor Search for Azcanta approach to blue-white, I think this is the real deal, and we're going to continue to see more of it.
I like it a lot. It's funny. I talked to Mark this week, but I didn't talk to him about this. I would actually.
He broke the 4. I think it's like the biggest gainer. I mean, other than I think the Affinity deck is going to get. I think the Affinity deck's going to get more of the spotlight. But there were like 10 people who got great results from Mark's deck this weekend. At the tippity top.
This deck is great against the Affinity deck.
Yes. And Mark actually played even more Stony Silence action.
So
but Terminus obviously, and particularly when you do it fast, like at instant speed.
The comment that I would make on this, instead of I would just do a some very slight change, which actually takes a little bit of the action out of the deck, but I think makes some of the other elements better. Would be to move Ancestral Vision and Negate, and maybe one other card out for Serum Visions, so that you have Serum Visions and Opt. And the reason is it makes your sideboard cards so much better. If you dramatically increase the number of 1 casting cost library manipulation cards that you have, you're going to greatly increase the number of times that you can land Stony Silence on turn 2 or Rest in Peace on turn 2. And plus, it's just good with Logic Knot and Search for Azcanta anyway. And I think Negate is a relatively low power card for this archetype in the format. It's obviously fine. Right, but I mean, if you just have a bunch of Opts and a bunch of Serum Visions, you are going to nail people with.
Well, remember, Dazani was the one who cut Opt for a little bit more of that action. Mark's build actually featured the full play set of Ops and just 1 Negate. I personally would not cut any Ops, and in fact, in the Open, there was a list that top-aided with 2 copies of Telling Time in addition to the 4 Ops, is sort of a poor man's Opt number 5 and 6.
But wouldn't you rather just have 4 Serum Visions and 4 Opts, so that your twos would be so good?
I'd have to ask Heezy about it, because Heezy actually played 0 Serum Visions. The original way he did it, he set it up with 0 copies of Serum Vision at all, in order to have as much of it as possible be playable at instant speed. But I don't hate having 2 copies of Serum Visions, but I don't think you want to play 4 Serum Visions and 4 Ops. It starts getting a little clunky.
So you're less than 50% likely to have one in your opening hand if you only have 4 copies in your deck, right? And I think that when you're talking about having low to medium number of sideboard cards along the lines of a Stony Silence, a Damping Sphere, which there's a singleton Damping Sphere in Dazani's deck, right? Or like 3 Rest in Peace. These are all like incredibly high action turn 2 plays. Like the game is night and day against that Affinity deck if you've got a turn 2 Stony Silence, right? You can just breathe if you have a turn 2 Stony Silence. I mean, same thing like against that Black-Red Vengevine deck, a turn 2 Rest in Peace will not necessarily save you if you're on the draw, right? But it's going to be way better for you if you're on the play. And so I would just that's where my head is going, right?
I just think
amazing sideboard cards.
Yep. Yeah, I just think it's a little challenging. One of the problems with the blue-white deck compared to like Jeskai, for instance, it's a lot harder to catch up if you don't play Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix. So like the more that you have to like, it's so tough to have to spend mana on the second turn playing a Serum Visions or an Opt.
Did Mark not play a Revelation?
No, of course not. No, I definitely like no Revelations. I think that part of the thing is that Mark played 3 Snapcasters, 2 Vendilion Clicks, 3 Jace the Mind Sculptors, 2 Teferis. That's so many more threats, plus the 2 Search for Azcanta. I like not playing Sphinx's Revelation, even though I the majority of people do play Sphinx's Revelation, but that was one of the things that Mark actually cut.
I like Revelation because just to your point, it's one of the best catch-up cards that's available to the archetype.
I just think the format's too fast for that right now. And Dazani didn't play it either, and I don't blame him. The format's just so fast.
Yeah, I think that I'm a Baneslayer Angel guy. No. Why would you play Lyra Dawnbringer in this build versus Baneslayer?
I love. Oh, you're switching on him. Keep him guessing.
But it has no extra text.
There's no extra text. Are you kidding? It's a legend.
There's no other
Chromium the Mutable.
There's no other angels.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, there's people who are. There's literally maniacs.
Your opponent doesn't know
dragons.
that.
For example, you have dragons.
Yeah, and that's true. You know what's going to suck is if somebody steals your Lyra Dawnbringer and then pumps their Mutavaults.
Well,
yeah, I don't know, man. I do like a Lyra Dawnbringer instead of the second Baneslayer Angel. But why not play Baneslayer Angel instead of Lyra Dawnbringer?
Baneslayer Angel is much better than Lyra Dawnbringer if you're going to play one.
I don't know. In the Modern Open, Felicity played Lyra Dawnbringer as well. And then Herberholz himself, I thought he actually did like a Torrential Gearhulk thing instead. Yeah, he went with Torrential Gearhulk, which is pretty dope. But yeah, I guess I don't know. Why would you play Lyra Dawnbringer? I bet there's a reason we're just overlooking. But keep them guessing.
Let's look at the lands. Maybe if there's like a legend land.
Nope.
I don't know.
Nope. Lyra Dawnbringer doesn't. Maybe people are playing 1 in a black kill target non-legend.
Maybe.
Yeah, that could be something.
All right.
Legends are dope. Anyway, there's been a lot of cool stuff. Hardened Scales, definitely the big talk of the town. And Humans continues to do reasonably well, although not as well on day 2 as it did on day 1. And Heezy, deck building extraordinaire, created another monster that has swept the format. And then finally, Blue-White Spirits, the real deal.
Yeah, loving all these innovations in Modern. My only recommendation for everyone out there, cut all your timely reinforcements, cut all your worships. You just don't worry about it. Just
don't do that.
Bye.
See you next week.
so great. Tried to play Dredge, so jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis days. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with